evening, everyone. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to today's public lecture by Mr. Datar on a topic which just seems just not to go away from our contemporary affairs. At least since the 80s, this huge, silent but significant conflict has been going on between the judiciary and what I'd like to call the legislative-executive complex on tribunals. Courts have been very happy to concede the need for tribunals, its existence, the idea that we need tribunals to take care of some specialized affairs. But there is a huge difference of opinion on how independent these are, how well they are functioning, who should be appointing judges to these tribunals, what should be their qualifications, and a number of questions of that sort. All of it is really anchored in this basic concept called independence of judiciary. And this has been litigated for the past 30 plus years continuously. Bar associations have been at the forefront of leading these litigations, of which Madras Bar Association deserves a special mention. I think they've filed more than 30, 40 petitions on the subject over the last couple of years. And leading the attack for the Madras Bar Association over the last years has always been Mr. Datar. Take any case on tribunals in India, and you will find that he's been one of the leading counsels who's questioned many of these statutes and appointment processes. So we have a very long and checkered history for tribunalization in India. As much as we agree that we need them, they need to be institutionalized, and we need to make them function much better. There are questions that we need to address on how well they are being set up, how truly independent they are, and we are all left with this question: what is the future of tribunalization in India? With those limited opening remarks, let me please hand over the stage to Mr. Datar, who really needs no introduction. Thank you, Mr. Datar, for accepting our invitation and taking time out to address the public about this. I look forward to your lecture.
Yeah, thank you, Mahesh. Thank you, Swastik. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for being present on a Saturday afternoon. Listening to a lecture on law, constitutional law is not the most exciting way to spend a late Saturday afternoon. So thanks for your time. When I spoke to Chitra Narayan, she suggested I speak on tribunals, particularly because it has been in the news in the recent past. And it's a problem that doesn't seem to go away. As we speak, we are preparing for the next round of battle against the latest tribunal law, which has been passed by Parliament. Right at the beginning, when we started this litigation, judges in the High Court and the Supreme Court asked me that why are you against tribunals? Why is the Madras Bar Association against tribunals? And I said that we are not against tribunals. We are for tribunals. Because they have a place in the justice delivery system. If you see the Constitution, you'll find the word tribunal in just two places, Article 136 and 27. It could be perhaps another schedule, but by and large, these are the two main places where you'll find the word tribunal itself. The Supreme Court has held that you can create a tribunal. It can be traced to any entry in the legislative list. Suppose there's an entry for banking, then you can have a debt recovery tribunal, which will be traced to the banking entry 45. You have sales tax tribunal, it can go to sales tax entry 54 of the sales tax provision for levy of sales and purchase tax. So tribunals have a place. Now, I'm going to give you for 45 minutes an overview of the entire tribunal system. What was the starting point, where are we, and what is the future of this very important branch. Mind you, today there are 1,100 judges, and of course there are 40% vacancies. There are equally a significant number of tribunal members, about 400 or 500 tribunal members all over the country, perhaps a little bit more than that. And even there, about 50% vacancies exist. But you'll realize that the number of tribunal members are almost 50-60% of the total number of judges. That's the significance of how big the tribunal system has become in the country. Now, tribunals have been there for quite some time. And if I will take the first slide, what I've done is to save time and to help you understand the development of the law. I have prepared for 5 or 6 slides, which will explain the development of the law of tribunals. Now, take, for example, the first slide, broadly speaking, I've divided tribunals into three categories. The first are tribunals within the judiciary, which I will call, for want of a better word, a judicial tribunal. So these are tribunals which have functioned within the judiciary, and they've been there for quite some time, ever since I was a junior. And before that, you had the MACT Motor Accident Claims Tribunal. I remember, I don't know the present position, but I remember the 5th Small Causes Court in the Madras High Court campus was the MACT court. Then you had an Motor Accidents Appellate Court. Both were basically small cause court judges and district judges. In all other states, you had junior division judges, civil judges who did the motor accident cases. Then you had rent control courts. I mean, particularly in Madras, Bombay, Calcutta, Delhi, rent control was a huge branch of litigation. There were people who did only rent control on a day in and day out basis. And all these rent controllers, so to speak, were basically judges who were part of the subordinate judiciary. So these are judicial tribunals. Then you come to what I would call statutory tribunals, that is, tribunals created under different acts. And the most common example is the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. You have the Customs Excise Tribunal. Then you have the NCLT. These are statutory tribunals. There are a number of them, but this is just to show that this is the second vertical as far as tribunals are concerned. And the last vertical is what I would call the constitutional tribunals, because these are tribunals formed under Article 323A and 323B of the Constitution. These articles were inserted by the infamous 42nd Amendment. And now you've got basically the administrative tribunals, CAT and the SAT. For a short while, you had the National Tax Tribunal, but which was virtually stillborn, and mercifully it has been struck down by the Supreme Court. Then you had taxation tribunals in different states, like the West Bengal Tribunal. You had the Tamil Nadu Special Taxation Tribunal, which wound up the Rajasthan Tax Tribunal. These are all tribunals under Article 323B. Mercifully, they are now wound up, and the tax jurisdiction has gone back to the High Court. Mind you, the important part of constitutional tribunals is they have the power to strike down a law as ultra vires. They have the same constitutional power as an Article 226 court. They can hold that a particular rule or particular provision is ultra vires the Constitution. That's a very significant step. In fact, they are as powerful as perhaps the High Courts. Now, come to the second slide. I'll take you on a small journey. If you read Wade and Forsyth's administrative law, you'll find that they were customs and excise commissioners in 1660. But the continued tribunal, which has continued for an unbroken period, are the General Commissioners of Income Tax, which is the UK equivalent of the Income Tax Tribunal, 1799. Now, of course, you've got the lower tier and upper tier tribunals, but almost for well over 200 years, you had the General Commissioners of Income Tax. Now, the Income Tax Act came into force in 1922. And after 15 years, they found that there is no quasi-judicial determination of disputes of income tax, because income tax after the war, First World War particularly, the number of assessees tax disputes went up. The 22 Act came into force, then it had number of cases started piling up. And earlier you had only one revision before the High Court, and then you had to go before the Commissioner, and then you had to go to the High Court. So you had the ITO, the Assistant Commissioner, the Revisional Commissioner, and then the High Court. So 1941, actually the amendment came in 1939, but the ITAT started functioning in 1941. And this became a very, very popular tribunal. And for those of you who are interested, one very important part of this tribunal in the colonial era, the legislature took the trouble of putting it under the Ministry of Law. Though income tax was under the Ministry of Finance, they said to maintain the independence of this tribunal, they placed it under the Ministry of Law. You'll know that the Commissioner of Safety, Railway Safety, is not under Railway Ministry, he is under the Ministry of Civil Aviation. He's under a different ministry to maintain his independence. Sadly, the one litigation which we have filed is to put all tribunals under the Ministry of Law and not put them under the parent departments. Today, Armed Forces Tribunal is under Ministry of Defense. CSTAT is under Ministry of Finance, which is extremely unhealthy. But this is another battle which we are fighting. So anyway, so 1948, the tribunal came, and it perhaps was the most successful tribunal so far. One other interesting tidbit I'll give you is that the first president of the Income Tax Tribunal was Munir Mohammed, who then, after partition, migrated to Pakistan, and later, a brilliant judge, he became the Chief Justice of Pakistan. So this is the history of the IT80. And as you see, it's now 80 years old. Now, the IT80 became the model for sales tax. You know that the first sales tax was levied in 1939 by the then Chief Minister Rajagopalachari. And the Madras General Sales Tax Act is actually the model for almost all the other states. And they contemplated the sales tax officer, an appellate commissioner, and the ST80, the sales tax appellate tribunal. In Madras, when I was a junior, the second or third floor of the city civil court had the sales tax appellate tribunal. It had a wonderful library, and it had 2 benches in Madras, state sales tax appellate tribunal. Fast forward to 1982, when excise and customs litigation picked up, they said, yes, now we require a tribunal. So they modeled it on the ITAT, and you had the CGAT, which is Customs Excise Gold Control Tribunal. Those of you who are young will not know that there was a law called Gold Control. It was abolished. And then subsequently, when service tax came, became Customs Excise Service Tax Appellate Tribunals, known by the acronym CSTAT. Then on the other tribunals, then after 82, there was a huge boost or growth in tribunals. In 86, after Sampath Kumar's case, you had administrative tribunals in all the states. You had central administrative tribunal, you had state administrative tribunals. Though in many states, including Madras, they have wound up the state administrative tribunal, and the litigation go back to the High Court. Then 1991 was the Company Law Board. Then you had the DRT. Then many others, Armed Forces, Intellectual Property Appellate, and so on and so forth. So this is how the tribunal started, and it went on and on. And now I'll go to the next slide. Yes, I'll just digress on the constitutional tribunals. 323A and 323B are the 2 articles which were inserted by the 42nd Amendment. Now, if you see those of you who are students and lawyers, please read the 42nd Amendment, and you'll know how draconian it was, how it was designed to completely strip the Supreme Court and the High Courts of their judicial powers. To give you an example, the Supreme Court could not consider the validity of a central statute unless there was a bench of 7, and by a majority, they had to strike it down. The High Court could not discuss the validity of a central law. If it was a state law, then at least 5 judges had to be in a bench to decide the validity. Even then, it had to be a majority of 3:2. Many amendments are made, but the most important was to start these tribunals. And we often forget that these tribunals were virtually replacements of the High Court. They had the power of all the High Courts, and they were tribunals. They are outside the judiciary. And in my come to the end of my slide, I'll show what is the basic problem with fundamental problem with tribunals. Now, this was the 42nd Amendment. It's a very interesting point. When the Janata government came to power after the emergency, Mrs. Gandhi was defeated. Mr. Morarji Desai became the Prime Minister. And the first thing they did was to introduce the 45th Amendment Bill, which later became the 44th Amendment. And they removed all these obnoxious provisions, all of it. Very strangely, and it's not known why, the 45th Amendment Bill tried to define what is secular, and it wanted to delete 323A and 323B, wanted to delete. The Janata Party had a majority in the Lok Sabha, but did not have majority in Rajya Sabha. So for some reason, this bill was defeated in Rajya Sabha insofar as these provisions are concerned. I don't know for what reason. I think we must regret this particular decision. But these 2 articles came to stay, though mercifully all the other articles, all the other damaging provisions were taken away. Particularly, you'll note that they made a provision that even in an emergency, you can't suspend Article 21. So a lot of safety was introduced by the 44th Amendment after the experience of the emergency. Now, though the amendment came in 1976, the tribunals first came in 85. That led to Sampath Kumar's case, where you had administrative tribunals, and the famous judgment of Bhagwati, which said you can't supplant the High Court, but you can supplement the High Court. and each state will have its own administrative tribunals. This was the law. And then in 1997, Chandra Kumar, again a long lecture on how tribunals should be independent and so on. And Chandra Kumar, one very important point of Chandra Kumar is, they said that there will be no direct appeal to Supreme Court. I mean, those of you, of course, most of you will not be born at that time, but after Sampath Kumar, there's huge volume of litigation in the Supreme Court on service law, because against the CAT and SAT, there's a direct appeal to Supreme Court. There's nothing in the High Court. And it became really unmanageable because the number of appeals which went to Supreme Court. So Chandra Kumar said two things. They struck down 226. They said they struck down the provision which took away writ jurisdiction. They said 226 and 136 is part of basic structure. You can't take away the right to file a writ petition. And since you can't take away the right to file a writ petition, they said against the decision of a tribunal, an appeal will lie before the division bench. So they said an appeal will lie before a division bench. This is a judicially created appeal, and that has come to stay. So that drastically reduced the number of people going to Supreme Court. It also helped people in South India where people couldn't afford to go to Supreme Court. So Chandra Kumar was a very important judgment where it discusses the need for a appeal to the High Court first. And most important of all, Chandra Kumar for the first time said that please shift all the tribunals to the law ministry. Let them not be under their parent department. This was said in 1997, and after 24 years, the government stubbornly refuses to allow tribunals to shift out of the respective ministries. In fact, an affidavit has been filed in the Supreme Court in one of the writ petitions to the Madras Bar Association, saying that the earlier government, that is the Manmohan Singh government, a group of ministers have decided that the tribunals will continue under the parent ministry. Then, of course, you had the National Tax Tribunal, which was struck down. I'll come to it later. And then you had these local tax tribunals. So this is how these are the constitutional tribunals, of which now only the CAT is functioning, and in some states SAT is functioning. Otherwise, there is no such 323B is virtually a dead letter, nothing much there. Yes, please go to the next. Now about the journey of the Madras Bar Association, you'll find that we have been fighting right through from day one. In 1988 actually, somebody had the idea that we should require a company law tribunal. They said there are so many company cases, so let's have a company law tribunal. So they created what is called a company law board by the Companies Amendment Act 1988. And when the rules came, I was shocked to learn that the chairman was going to be an IAS officer, and the other two members were also bureaucrats. So we filed a writ petition in the Madras High Court. My friend Balachandran was the petitioner. In fact, I will tell you a small thing that nobody was willing to be the petitioner. Nobody wanted to take on the government. Balachandran was my chamber colleague, and we chose Balachandran because he was the only person who was above 45 at that time. And the minimum age requirement should be 45 to be a member of the CLB. So since he was eligible, we made him the petitioner. And then we started the journey. I remember the matter first came in the 6th court in the Madras High Court. We almost got dismissed. It took 35 minutes to just get it admitted. And that's how the journey started. Then it came first before Justice Mishra. Some provisions were struck down. The CLB started functioning in 1991, and it went on. In 2002, again, we had the Competition Commission. There again, the chairman was an IAS officer. The both members were all bureaucrats. Again, we challenged in the Supreme Court, that was struck down. Then we come to the most important litigation, national company law. Very unfortunate. There was a committee which was formed to go into the law. The question of forming a company law committee was never there before that particular commission. That was not there at all. At the last minute, without any discussion, because I had given evidence before this commission when they came to Madras, and there was no discussion about any kind of company law tribunal. We had other discussions. We were shocked to see that one full chapter has been added, creating a national company law tribunal with mainly manned by bureaucrats, taking away the High Court's jurisdiction completely, creating a national constitutional appellate tribunal, and so on and so forth. So we challenged it in 2002, then it came before Justice Babu and it was struck down in 2004. The Union of India filed an appeal in the Supreme Court. And they tried to get a stay. We opposed it. Luckily, we succeeded. And till 2010, so from 2002 to 2010, NCLT never functioned thanks to the judgment of Justice Jaisram Babu and Justice Karpa Vinayagam and the efforts of all my colleagues were able to succeed. And then you had the final judgment. But before I come to that, in between, we had this National Taxation Tribunal. It's very sad how the entire system works. Overnight, there was an ordinance in September that from 1st October, there will be a National Taxation Tribunal and all direct, indirect taxes cases will be taken away from the High Courts and will be decided by this National Taxation Tribunal. And this was not under the statute, but under Article 323B. There will be a chairman in Delhi who will be a retired Supreme Court judge, and there will be benches in some 4-5 states, and this will be a National Taxation Tribunal. I saw the ad, and an interesting point was the chairperson was supposed to be the Supreme Court judge, and from 1st October, all the High Court jurisdiction was to be completely taken away. The cases from High Court were to be transferred. So I moved a lunch motion. I moved an emergency matter before the Chief Justice, and he did not give stay. He issued notice. Then it so happened that for the members of the National Taxation Tribunal, who could be retired judges also, there was an advertisement in the Madras High Court Advocate Association that all the retired judges had to apply with their passport photograph and their school leaving certificate, like as if you're applying for some job. So I took that Xerox copy of that advertisement and told the Chief Justice, this is what they expect the High Court judges to do. He immediately stayed it. So NTT also got stayed and got stayed for 9 years. It never came, light of the day, thanks to, again, our efforts in the Madras High Court. Now I fast forward to 2010, which is a very, very important watershed year as far as tribunals are concerned. Between 2005 and 2010, the Union of India wanted to dismiss our case, saying that the Delhi Bar Association judgment of the Supreme Court had upheld DRT, that upheld the creation of tribunals, and therefore there was nothing in our petition. Best thing to dismiss, let the company law tribunal start. The entire commercial litigation is locked up. Let us start. We opposed this and we argued for 2 days, saying that the Delhi Bar Association, certain provisions don't apply, and this must be heard by a 5-judge bench. And I remember it was heard by Chief Justice Balakrishnan, Justice D.K. Jain, and another judge, Sirpurkar, I think. And it was then referred to 5 judges, and finally it came before 5 judges. Now, very interesting point is they took up NCLT and NTT both together in 2009. We argued went on for 5 days before the Supreme Court, and the reserved judgment in 2009. For 1 year, no judgment came. And on the day of the retirement of Justice Balakrishnan, they delivered the NCLT judgment, striking down various provisions. But they said NTT will postpone it later because it's a different tribunal. So NCLT was struck down in 2010. Again, nothing happened as far as NTT is concerned in 4 years. Now, NTT came before a 5-judge bench, and Rohinton Nariman was the new judge who had just been appointed in 2014. Now, my main argument in the NTT was that, look, High Courts have the power to decide substantial questions of law. Income tax, central excise. High Court's power is the tribunal is a final fact-finding authority, and appeals go to the High Court only on substantial questions of law. And I said that deciding substantial questions of law is a core, essential judicial function. It cannot be taken outside the judiciary. And I'll show you my slide later when I come to it. You can't do it. And apart from the lengthy majority judgment, if you're interested, kindly read the concurring view of Justice Nariman, who held that this is impermissible under our Constitution. Judicial decisions can be taken only by the judiciary. And I had quoted Canadian Supreme Court judgments and US court, and he relied strongly on a 7-judge bench of the Canadian Supreme Court, saying that essential judicial functions cannot be taken away. Now, I'll just request Swastik to go to the last but one slide, and I'll show you what our basic point before. Yes, our basic argument before Nariman and the bench with Justice Kher, Chief Justice Kher. I said that, look, your separation of powers, your legislature, your executive, your judicial. Now, from 1951, from INRI Delhi laws, you have said that essential legislative functions cannot be go to the executive. Essential legislative functions cannot be delegated. I said the same principle applies to the judiciary. Essential judicial functions cannot go to the executive. It must be decided only by the superior judiciary, the High Courts and the Supreme Court. I said it's a mistake to give 226 powers to them. That was accepted by Nariman, and he struck down National Taxation Tribunal on a constitutional ground. In the other majority judgment, they held some sections are invalid, but they said you can have an entity. But for Justice Nariman, they would have a different kind of entity. But he said that once and for all, core judicial functions cannot be taken away, which was a landmark, very, very important ruling. And his judgment, with great respect, deserves to be read really, really carefully. It's now gone off. Nobody bothers about it, but it's a masterly discussion on what's the role of a judiciary, what's the role of the courts, and then how you can't take away powers of the judiciary and give it to executive tribunals. Now, what's happening is these tribunals all come under the executive. All tribunals come under the executive. They are like departments of the executive. They get housing allowance like a secretary. They get perks, etc., like a secretary. So they are basically executive in nature. There's a lack of independence. And that's the problem. But this is the function of the entity, and this is the principle of which I'm opposed right from the beginning. I'm opposed that please don't take away essential judicial powers and give it to the executive. You can have an income tax tribunal, let them decide the income tax dispute. But what is a substantial question of law? What is the constitutionality? Let that be preserved by the judiciary. Go back, please. Yeah, go to the next. So then we had in, just one more, just go back once. So you'll find that we succeeded in CLB, succeeded in Competition Commission, NCLT, NTT, NCLT2, the Supreme Court, National Tax Tribunal. In 2015, the 2013 Amendment Act came, Companies Act came. Again, we challenged NCLT. Again, we partly succeeded, but not fully. Then in 2017, the new rules were framed. New rules, which were then struck down in 2019. In 2018, the Madras High Court struck down the GST tribunal provisions. 2020 rules came, again we succeeded. 2021, again the rules were struck down. Now 2021, the Act has come. Shockingly, making a law what the Supreme Court held to be unconstitutional was again has been enacted. Like the Mandal Commission, when Supreme Court says you can't have more than 50% reservation, you can't have an act saying I'll give more than 50%. As absurd as that. And this is what they have done. So again, next week we are back in court, going to fight this matter again. So these are the main cases which we have fought. I have not dealt with the minor skirmishes and innumerable interim applications, interim reliefs, and so on and so forth that have been filed in the Supreme Court from time to time. We have also Madras Bar Association. I have represented the association in quite a few parliamentary committees in the parliamentary annex building, appeared before committees, opposed NTT, etc. So we have been fighting this battle to restrict tribunals only to certain areas and not to take away essential judicial functions. Next, please. Yeah, I've already discussed this. Now, as far as tribunals are concerned, I've given a history of our battle. What are we doing? What are we fighting? The question arises, what is the role of a tribunal? Are they required in our judicial and justice delivery system? In my view, entry 11A of list 3, concurrent list, refers to administration of justice. And it's my personal view that tribunals are part of the administration of justice. They are part of the justice delivery system. They're important. Income Tax Tribunal has done a wonderful job. CSTAT has done a wonderful job. Take the Armed Forces Tribunal, a poor Jawan, a war widow whose husband has sacrificed his life for the country. Her pensionary benefits, some benefits given to her, like a gas agency or something. There's some difficulty. There is so much of litigation on armed forces matters. that Armed Forces Tribunal, she need not go to the High Court, she can go to the tribunal and get her grievance redressed. So there is a role of tribunals in the justice delivery system. But what is their role? What is their place? I have 2 points to make here. Based on the research I've done over the last 35 years, one thing you will find in UK, Australia, and so on, in most countries, a tribunal exists in a list or a litigation between the citizen and the state. You'll have a FEMA tribunal between the Enforcement Directorate and the citizen, Income Tax Tribunal, SSE and the Tax Tribunal. You go to CSTAT, the SSE and the Customs Department. So this is where the tribunal role comes from. It is my view that tribunals should not replace the courts, where individual rights are to be decided by the courts when it's a list between two private citizens. There, for example, trademark, a dispute between, say, a multinational company and another company for infringement of trademark. It's a private list. It should not go before any tribunal. It should be heard only by the civil courts. You'll be surprised that throughout the world, in fact, I gave a complete history. Unfortunately, they did not refer to it. In not a single country in the world, you have a company law tribunal where the company jurisdiction is entirely exercised by the tribunals outside the jurisdiction. Today, you know, all company matters are before the NCLT, NCLAT, then Supreme Court. So a judge who becomes a High Court judge would never have opened the Companies Act because no company case comes before the High Court. In fact, I argued that if all the tribunals, if I had lost the case, then except Article 226, 136, writ petitions, squash petitions, there'll be nothing in the High Courts. Trademark, patent, tax, company law, debt recovery, everything gone to tribunals. Even I'm opposed to DRT. It's a matter between a bank and a citizen. And I argued the matter with the Supreme Court. I said that why are you creating multiple DRTs? Why can't you create an additional district court to deal with banking cases? Let it be within the judiciary. Let the civil matters be decided. But then so the first point I'm making is tribunals should not decide lists between private parties. And that a wonderful point on that is taken by the Canadian Supreme Court. It's called In Re Residential Tenancies. It's a remarkable judgment, 7 judges. And Justice Nariman has extensively quoted from that judgment. I came across that judgment while doing some other research. And interestingly, you'll know that there were more than 1 lakh arrears of rent control cases in Canada. The judicial system was not able to take so many landlord-tenant disputes. So there was something called a Green Committee by Mr. Green. And he recommended that, look, the courts are very slow, there is elaborate evidence. Let's create rent control tribunals, which are manned by, say, retired judge or whatever. And they will immediately, quickly dispose of cases. In an outstanding judgment, analyze the entire area of quasi-judicial determination, judicial determination. The Canadian Supreme Court held, if there are too many rent control cases and there is a shortage of courts, the solution is to create more courts and not to create tribunals. They said you can't say because the judiciary is handicapped, I'll create tribunals. The answer is you equip the judiciary, make it stronger. So this is my vision for the tribunal, my view, that all litigation involving private parties, trademark, company law, etc., should come back to the High Court and should not go to tribunals. My colleagues who are practicing the NCLT say that it's still a very, very difficult situation because of vacancies, no cases are being heard and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, my view is that barring the income tax tribunal and excise tribunal, virtually no tribunal has really succeeded. DRT came, it was a complete failure. Then you had the SURFACI Act. Now you got the IBC, so it's not really succeeded. IPAB did not succeed. You had FEMA tribunal, which is virtually not functioning. The Armed Forces Tribunal in several cases has not functioned properly. So by and large, the tribunals have not delivered what it should have delivered. And what the reason for that I'll come to shortly. The other objection I've got is the 5-year, 4-year term. Now, today what's happened is all tribunals are basically post-retirement places. you're 58, 60, you join the tribunal, you can work up to 65, you get the salary of the additional secretary, you get a house, and so it's a post-retirement kind of post, which is very unfortunate. The collateral damage is that because it's a 5-year term, many competent advocates are reluctant to join the tribunal. What do you do after 5 years? Today, number of people join the NCLT, they work for 5 years. Now, they have to start their practice all over again. And unfortunately, the government has not kept its word. When I was arguing the case, they said the 5-year term is there, it's subject to renewal. So these people can join for 5 years, it will be renewed for 5 more years. In fact, when I argued the case against the present Attorney General, he said they can join at 50 and up to 65, they'll get 3 extensions. But I'm sorry to say, I have yet to see any case where they have extended in the recent past company law tribunal. So people have spent 5 years and gone away. Now, which advocate at the age of 50, who's reasonably successful, will leave his practice, which has been built up with great amount of hard work, close his office, all his juniors will be out of work. He goes to the NCLT, not knowing that what will happen to him after 5 years. So this 5-year, 4-year term is an extremely damaging part of the tribunal system. As I said, they are post-retirement posts. Then I just give the example of the Canadian Supreme Court, where they say private litigation, no tribunals. The other difficulty in tribunals is you create specialized tribunals saying the High Court can't deal. You create a green tribunal, you create a FEMA tribunal, you create a cyber tribunal. But unfortunately, the people who man it are not specialized in that field. Many judges are unwilling to join because the lack of the term of appointment. Then the other problem with tribunals is complete lack of infrastructure. I remember the IPAB was functioning in a very small place near Mount Road. Again, we moved the Madras High Court. The union government said they didn't have the funds, or they didn't provide for the funds for the budget. With great difficulty, they've got a place which is slightly far away. But this is the trouble in most tribunals. There is no adequate infrastructure at all. And in the last case, when I argued before the Supreme Court, the latest case, when I was speaking to a number of people on what is the difficulty in starting tribunals, what is the difficulty, the biggest single problem, the single biggest problem is a lack of housing for being provided for retired for tribal members. Now, the tribal members are retired judges or retired civil servants, retired commissioners. They're already 60 plus, they're going to join the tribunal. Now, unless you give them houses, where do they go? And 70% of tribunals are in Delhi, or 80% of the tribunals are in Delhi. Now, if you're going to give them a 40,000 rupee housing allowance, there's no way you can see. So you don't get the best people. They don't get proper housing, they don't get proper facilities. So there is no point creating tribunals unless you have a proper ecosystem, giving them adequate help, giving them proper housing. So with great difficulty, now the Supreme Court has said that they will get 1,50,000 rupees as a rent allowance for houses, much more than what a secretary gets. But the argument is wrong because the secretary has already got allotted houses because of the central pool. A retired judge from Madras who goes to Delhi, he has no place to stay, no house, no facilities, infrastructure. I mean, it is so sad the way these tribunals are treated. We had the Intellectual Property Appellate Board. Its base is Madras. Why Madras? Because at the relevant time, the minister concerned was from Tamil Nadu, therefore he put it in Madras. There's no reason why IPAB should be in Madras. It could have been in Bombay, it could have been in Calcutta, but it was in Madras. Doesn't matter. Because majority litigation is in Bombay and Delhi, they used to hold camps in Delhi and camp in Bombay, camp in Delhi. Although the hearing is in Delhi, there's no place for the tribunal to work. So it was really shocking and rather shameful that some hearings were being conducted in the Tamil Nadu Bhavan by the then president. And on one occasion, when the conference room was required by the then chief minister, the tribunal had to shift and work from the canteen of the Tamil Nadu Bhavan. This is the pathetic state in which they are. They would go to outstation, there were no proper cars provided to them. So the whole tribunal system is so bleak. I'm sorry to sound so pessimistic, but if you want tribunals to work, to be a really robust system, then you must provide infrastructure. Take, for example, consumer courts. I have not touched the state tribunals. You've got consumer courts. Can you say, if you have proper consumer courts, look at the number of people who will get employed as tribunal members, look at the amount of work that will be generated, amount of grievance redressal can take place about people. Today, who can go to the consumer court? I'm told the case pending for 3-4 years. What's the point in having a consumer court? If I can't get my consumer problem sorted out in 1 year, what's the point of the court? So if these tribunals are fully manned, if they've provided their infrastructure, their basic thing, it will be a huge point. I had gone to Singapore once to set up this Palkhiwala Arbitration Center, and I was surprised to see in their Singapore government's website, their motto was export law, import litigation. That is to say, they said, make Singapore such a welcome place for people to have their litigation. So you provide excellent infrastructure, you provide competence, you provide all the proper things, and look at the reward. Today, more than 50% of Singapore arbitration is from India. So they have provided the proper infrastructure. And I just think to myself, if you have proper tribunal housing, tribunal complexes, give them housing. And one suggestion I made, I've given a report with the help of Daksh and Vidhi, that let there be a tribunal service. And those of you youngsters who are practice or finish 10 years practice, 15 years practice, around 40, 45. I said, let them be recruited as tribunal members, have an annual Indian Tribunal Service examination, recruit them, and let them work as tribunal members till they are 60. So at least they know that from 45 to 62, for the next 17 odd years, my career is set. I'm going to leave my career as a lawyer. I'm going to take up a career as a judicial officer. And then if they get a chance, they can go to the High Court. You'll be amazed at the number of people who will be willing to join the tribunal once they know that they have a term of office till 62. In the income tax tribunal, there are a large number of applicants who apply for tribunal because they know that they are going to retire till 62. Unfortunately, they have made that also as 4-year term and 5-year term. So these are the issues of tribunals. Now, the government has again come back and said they'll allow only 4 years. Less than 50, they will not recruit. They want retired civil servants. I think it is about time that the government has a clear vision what it wants the tribunals to do. Do you want tribunals to be independent, really delivering justice, free from interference, or do you want them to be a department of a particular ministry where they have to look to the main ministry for every single infrastructure? From Chandra Kumar, again and again they said, please put the tribunals under the law ministry. I gave the example of the Tribunals Act of 2002 in the UK, where they have got the lower tier tribunal, the upper tier tribunal. All the tribunals are under the Lord Chancellor. They have a separate budget. They have separate infrastructure. And today it's a highly respected system. Same thing in America, they call it administrative agencies. Australia has got an excellent tribunal system where all these tribunals are completely independent. They come under the Chief Justice or under the Law Ministry, and there is no interference. There's excellent infrastructure, and that's how they function. And believe me, the investment is not much. You don't require thousands of crores. It requires just a few hundred crores to set up a proper tribunals all over the country. And once you do that, recruit young people at the age of 40, 45. Today, the people who are coming out of the law schools are far brighter than what we were at that point of time. They know much more. They were exposed to so much of literature, teaching, and so on and so forth. If they become members of the tribunal, you'll create such a specialized body of youngsters. There'll be a specialized body of income tax tribal members. What you call it? Administrative tribunal. You got the other other tribunals. They'll be highly specialized branches, cyber laws, foreign exchange, and these people can go on to the age of retirement, and that will also improve the quality of the disposal, the quality of the judgment these tribunals deliver. When I was a junior, the income tax tribunal, it was a pleasure to appear before the tribunal. Some of them became Supreme Court judges. Justice Raghunath became Supreme Court judges. Ishwar became Chief Justice, President and Judge of the Delhi High Court. Justice Rangarajan became Judge of the Andhra Pradesh High Court. Outstanding members who wrote brilliant judgments. The tribunal law reports were worth reading as good as the High Courts. This was what the system was. And I've still not lost hope. I think sooner or later, let the government realize that tribunals, like any plant, like any thing, must be nurtured, must be encouraged, and it will bear enormous fruit for the benefit of all concerned. Thank you so much. Are there any questions?
Thank you, sir, for tracing out the history of tribunals in India and the whole conflict and the points of conflict that we've had. If you have questions, please put them into the chat box. I'll pick them up and read them out. We already have a question. Dinesh Singh asks, sir, why the tribunals are not merged with courts like administrative division of courts. Instead of having parallel infrastructure, we in India could also have administrative procedure code for the procedural flexibility of these administrative divisions. Making Indian tribunal service would be a Herculean expense for the Exchequer. What do you think Exchequer is? Do you think Exchequer is willing for that?
Yes, actually, there's a step. This is we have started in this direction. You know that the IPAB has now been dissolved. 5 tribunals have been shut down and gone back because they found that where the work was not enough, they would send it back to the High Court. And so the IPAB has gone back. So hopefully all trademark patent cases will now go back to the courts. There will be consequent amendments. I personally believe that they should also dismantle company law matters for NCLT, keep only IBC in the NCLT. All cases of operation, mismanagement, interpretation of company law, let it go back to the High Court. Because by and large, the litigation is only in 8 or 9 High Courts. When we did a survey, we found that the 95% of company litigation is just in 7 or 8 High Courts. In other High Courts, in some states, for example, mining litigation is much more. There's less of company litigation because of the dynamics and the economics of that particular state. So go back to the old system as far as companies are concerned. That can be done. Then similarly, for example, in as an IP has gone back, the income tax can go up to 62, and wherever is not, for example, the Armed Forces Tribunal, you can also perhaps have the benches and let them go to the High Court. So wherever is a private list, and DRTs can be shut down. I don't see why DRT should continue. They can straight away increase district courts. Say in each, say today Tamil Nadu has 3 DRTs. How much expense does it create to create 3 more district judges posts, rather than have a complete separate registry, separate buildings, and so on and so forth? And then you don't have housing, don't have infrastructure for the DRT. Then some bank gives you a place, then you use the bank. So the bank is a litigant, and you are the tenant. See, armed forces also, you are the armed forces. They give the infrastructure, which is not really healthy. It should be completely independent.
I have a question about there are some assumptions or some reasons that are floated for having tribunals, like there's too much dependency in the other places, and this is supposed to be cheaper. But are these assumptions for real? For one thing, many of these tribunals are far away from, they don't have a presence in all the states to start with. So take the NGT. Supposedly they hold these circuit benches or video conferencing hearings, but just about everyone that I've spoken to says that they are a pain. It doesn't happen on time. The cases don't get listed. Urgent interim orders are hard to obtain. So that's one part on whether it's actually eating into access to justice. Second thing is also whether, I'm not very sure whether this argument that it's less expensive is actually for real. Because almost all the lawyers who appear in the tribunals have a regular High Court practice, and at times they charge more for appearing in the tribunal than in the High Courts. So in terms of the cost of the litigation too, I'm not very sure whether it's actually answering up to this idea that it's cheaper. Can I have your views on that?
You're absolutely right. When I was practicing in the Madras High Court in those days, Friday afternoon used to be green bench. That time, I think Justice Raju, I don't remember the Chief Justice at that point of time, but Friday afternoon was, the Chief Court was the green bench. And in all courts, the Chief Justice Court would be the green bench. And you knew that once a week the court would sit and the matters could be taken up. If it is an urgent matter, you could mention on another working day, the Chief would take it in the afternoon. We know a case where suddenly they were letting effluents into the fields. So we moved an urgent matter in the morning at 2 o'clock. He came, he gave a stay. So it was working perfectly fine. And see, if you have a green bench in every court, you have 28 NGTs virtually, in that sense, all over the country, which is more than sufficient. Now today, only got 3 benches. So by taking away the green bench, what did you achieve? And anyway, the person handling the NGT is a retired judge. And if it's a question of pollution, he can always take an expert report or something like that. So this is a classic example of you're just shooting yourself in the foot. DRT saying, why did you take it? Trademark, why did you take it away? It could have continued here itself. Even Armed Forces Tribunal. Now you have a big controversy that matters coming in the Supreme Court. Earlier, I could come to the High Court, the widow could come and go to the local High Court, get a relief. Now you have to go to AFT. Then if it's some Article Section 15 matter, you only go to the Supreme Court. Who can afford all that? Very unfortunate.
Utkarsh has a question. Utkarsh Kumar asks, Sir, what is the primary reason behind the government's insistence on bringing the exact law that Supreme Court struck?
I am absolutely shocked that this has happened, because normally for the Supreme Court holds, say, X plus Y is equal to Z, then there are cases where Parliament is supreme, it can amend the law, it can remove the basis of the judgment. Like after the Vodafone case, they removed the basis. They said even a non-resident share, a foreign share will be deemed to be in India, the underlying assets in India. So, n number of times it has happened, like your 31B, you stride on the land reform legislation, they put it back in the 9th schedule. So it's not that the court has the last word. If Parliament feels that this is of public interest, they can do it. But this is very rare where Supreme Court says X plus Y is Z, cannot be Z. You make again a law saying X plus Y is Z within 2 months of the. And Supreme Court said, please fill up the vacancies in 10 days, 30 days have passed, nothing has happened. Oh, how can this be unheard of? In fact, in the Maratha reservation, which I appeared, Supreme Court said 50 when the Maratha reservation went to 64, it was struck down, saying you can't violate the Supreme Court norm. So, how it could be done? It should not be done. In fact, this is one of the facets of constitutional conventions, constitutional morality, that if you don't like a judgment, you remove the basis. Nobody says that is the final word.
Divya Bhatnagar asks, if all the tribunals have only retired judges of High Courts as members and the age of retirement from the tribunal is 70 years, as a proposition, what is your opinion about that?
See, on principle, I don't want the retired judges concept at all. It's not proper. But if you ask me, if you want to have it, then if you say that a High Court judge will be there for 8 years or 5 years, I would say after 62, 5 years, even it doesn't really matter, because what happens when a person is 62 is very rare that immediately becomes a tribunal member. Normally 6-7 years gap is there. 6-7 months gap is there. So he becomes only at 63, 64. And then if he's going to work till 68, I don't mind, because people are, in terms of health, all of us have got a much longer life experience. It can be there. See, what I'm saying is, whatever it is, you keep a proper vision. You first have tribunal halls, have tribunal infrastructure, keep housing. Then you put it. You don't create a tribunal without any kind of infrastructure and then expect somebody to come and occupy the place. In the recent tribunal for RERA, you appoint the chairperson, then the chairperson goes and hunts for a place. And then he gets a place in some building.
Kaustav Saha is asking, do you see any problems with an equitable jurisdiction like oppression and mismanagement being exercised by tribunals?
See, on principle, I believe that if it's a private place, it should be decided by the court. I don't see how an oppression mismanagement can be decided by a retired registrar or something like that. Why? It's not an equitable jurisdiction. This is a statutory jurisdiction. It's not equity in that sense. So I think that shifting oppression mismanagement, shareholder disputes, rectification of shares, meeting disputes should not go to a tribunal. It should be decided by the civil courts. Whether the district court or it's the high court doesn't matter. And one important point was, thanks to the Companies Act and the Company Court Rules of 1959, every high court had a company division. So even where like in Karnataka, the trials are not held by the High Court, they are held by the District Court. But Company Court was separately there. So there was a Company Court. So that system was working very fine. And let's just look back. You dismantle the High Court system. If you are dismantling something and putting something better in its place, yes, I'll welcome it. But what is the purpose in dismantling something which is working and put something which is defective, like the income tax tribunal? People are going up to 62. Suddenly you say you will not appoint somebody for more than 5 years and 4 years. For what?
Chitra has an interesting question/observation. With the attention paid to growing tribunals, are we not avoiding addressing issues in the civil courts?
Are we not?
Are we not avoiding addressing issues in the civil courts, sort of sidestepping what's going on in the civil courts?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, when I was arguing before Justice Gogoi, he asked me, how many vacancies are there? He asked me. I said, sir, I was told 40. He said, no, 44%. He said, out of 1100, I got 447 vacancies. So in the course, I said, look, if you fill up even 300 out of these 447 vacancies, you don't require half the tribunals. You don't require the patent tribunal. You don't require the NCLT. Today, there are totally 60 NCLT members all over the country. Even if you fill up 100 vacancies of High Court, you may not require the NCLT in the first place.
Nikita has a question. She asks, specialist tribunals like NGT are in a better position to entertain questions of environmental law that involve complex scientific issues because of the presence of technical members. These members are more competent to decide than regular benches of the High Court. In such a situation, should not the NGT be given powers same as that of the High Court?
Yeah, no, I agree with her that if you got NGT, if you give them infrastructure, you have proper courts, you fill them properly, there's no problem. You make sure that really good technical members come. It's not just a retired judge, but a good scientist or a good environmental expert comes. I have no problem with that. But I'm asking, I've done myself so many environment cases. But Chitra was also in one of the environment cases for those farmers. I mean, how was the High Court less competent to decide an environment dispute? The point is, if you take the NGT case, deforestation, what happens? You're doing work without a forest license. You're polluting without a proper thing. The pollution limits are crossing the BOD levels. So, to answer her question, yes. If you really see, the whole point is if you do the law, frame a law, and you implement it in the manner it is intended, I have no problems. You keep all top class 62 members of tribunals, I have no problems. If at all you want to have the system. But what's the point in creating NGTs? Then there is no bench. Then one person sits in camp in Cochin. There is a video conference. It's very sad. I also feel if it's a basic question of NGT, being tribunal, I think high courts they were doing it earlier. I don't see why they can't do it.
Rosena is asking for a comment on the independence, efficacy, and efficacy of the state tribunals, not the service tribunals, but the other ones in the states.
See, basically now in the state tribunals, you are basically, I'm not talking of not the judicial tribunal, I'm talking of the quasi-judicial tribunals. So they were typically the sales tax tribunal. Then you had the consumer courts. They're the most important state tribunals. Of course, you had some land reform tribunal, etc., which I don't know. I have no idea how they function, so I should not comment. But in consumer, I asked all you how many years the vacancies have come. And one very disturbing thing which I found, the Bombay State Commission is headed by a High Court judge. All right, it goes on appeal to the National Commission. There it is decided by a single IAS retired person who is not a judge, and he sets aside the High Court judge order because there is nobody there. It's so sad. So the functioning of the National Consumer Courts, my friend Anil Raja, who's written books on it, he tells me that there are no vacancies are not filled up for days. For years, sorry.
It's 5:29. I know that Mr. Datar has to leave by 5:30.
I can take a couple of questions more. No problem.
Dinesh Singh asks, why should there be technical members part of the bench with binding decision when ultimate decision is based on law? Shouldn't technical members' opinion be advisory for judicial members?
No. See, that's why if you see Chandra Kumar, where he says, like, say, for example, income tax, we had a healthy system for judicial member and accountant member because a lot of it involved accounts, taxation, accounts, books of entry, balance sheets, and so on, which you and I as a lawyer may not be familiar with. But you have an income tax commissioner, retired commissioner, or you have a number of senior chartered accountants who join the tribunal. The healthy mix of technical expertise and so on. Like she asked about expert NGT member and a judicial member. That was the combination. That's why in company law we said let it be one company secretary or a company affairs person and a judicial member. So there I don't agree that the technical member has no role to play. There's a role to play in the specialized tribunal. Suppose, for example, you have cyber tribunal, hypothetically, tomorrow, the personal data protection bill comes. So a person who's familiar with cyber law, cyber security would perhaps be an asset to the tribunal with the judicial component.
Dipanshu Kar asks, could you kindly elaborate why private matters should not be heard by tribunals when they can be heard, and for that matter, we are encouraging that they be heard by through ADR methods? Why cannot private matters also come under the domain of?
Easy. As far as ADR is concerned, ADR. If you talk about ADR, you're talking about mediation. Okay. If you're talking about arbitration, then if it's a construction arbitration, yes, it's up to you to choose. It's party autonomy. Now Supreme Court has said party autonomy is the most important. I know my father was in the Merchant Navy. He had done a number of shipping arbitrations. So 3 retired captains would sit and decide a dispute very quickly without any kind of tech. The counter will be 2-3 pages, claim will be 2-3 pages, damages, something. Oh, no problem. Today, Bombay Stock Exchange conducts hundreds of arbitrations. The arbitrators are senior brokers, senior stock exchange members who know the subject. So it's not necessary it should be judges at all. But if it's a matter of company law, it's a theory of separation of powers. In fact, when I got the entity struck down, one member got so angry with me. He said, "Why are you taking our chances of becoming members of National Tax Department?" I said, it's separation of powers. A judge may be a brilliant administrator, but he can't do the role of a chief secretary. And a secretary can't do the role of a judge. This is our constitutional system. You want to decide cases, then you join the judiciary. But don't have the half-baked thing of important cases of company law being decided by a non. I know in case of company law, but there's some retired commissioner of the company. Didn't have a clue of what is happening.
That bureaucrats also figure out that here is another great post-retirement avenue.
So that's what unfortunately has become now. You get in those days 3 more years of red light car and all the perks of office.
And I think a team of researchers with Professor Shubhankar Dham had come up with some empirical evidence to show that judges of the constitutional courts approach their retirement age, there is a tendency to not vote against the government. And he was
that's an allegation made, yes.
I think it's more than an allegation because this work has looked at a significant long number of cases over about more than a decade. And they've done.
They found out, is it? Statistically.
Yes, they have statistically shown that as the retirement age approaches, there is a tendency to not rule against the government. And one of the reasons for this that was hypothesized was probably post-retirement appointments to play.
You are not seen as anti-establishment.
Yes. I think we can come to a close. It's 5:33. Maybe I'll just wrap this up with an observation by one of the attendees. Vanita Patnaik remarks that would it be right to sum up that it sounds like a Schrodinger's cat like a situation.
That's a nice remark. Yeah, thanks. I agree with that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Datar, for taking the time.
Thank you.
Giving us a small overview of the whole thing, and we hope that the next round of litigation will produce some results.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Take care. All of you wish you happy Janmashtami and a nice week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.